Sam Dalton stepped off the platform, the cold cutting through him after 2 long years overseas. His eyes locked on his daughter Grace, and his heart filled with hope until it froze. The little girl ran into another man's arms and, clear as day, called him Dad. Who was that man? Why had his own daughter forgotten him and given his name to someone else? The house that once was home now felt distant, colder than any battlefield. In that single moment, every memory, every hope for peace collapsed, and Sam understood. The greatest fight he would ever face wasn't out there in war. It was right here, inside his own family. Late in the day, the sky hung grey like old steel stretching to the edge of town. Havenwood Station, usually quiet, now echoed with the crackle of loudspeakers calling the train. Wind came off the open fields, sharp as a knife, carrying the smell of oil and rusted iron. Sam Dalton stepped down from the car, his boots worn thin, grinding against the stained concrete, the faded pack on his shoulder bouncing with each heavy breath. He drew in deep, hoping for the old sense of home pine wood, cornbread from kitchen ovens, but all he found was cold air and emptiness. 2 years. 2 years in the desert sand, nights lit by stray fire and horizons on fire. 2 years of holding tight to one dream, whispering his daughter's face in the dark. Grace. Brown eyes bright as autumn leaves, a laugh like wind chimes. He had pictured this moment 100 times. His little girl running to him, calling out, "Daddy," and his arms closing around her, the weight of war washed away. The train whistle groaned long and low. Passengers spilled onto the platform. Sam's eyes searched, his heart pounding like a drumline. Then, in the corner of the crowd, he saw her, a girl with long hair, a red coat too big for her frame, holding a worn doll. Grace. There was no mistaking. All the noise around him vanished. His lips parted into a smile, his eyes filling. He dropped his pack and stepped forward, ready to call her name. But she ran, not to him. Grace sprinted straight into the arms of another man. Tall, broad-shouldered, black leather jacket, wearing the kind of smile that claimed ownership. He swept her up, tight against his chest, spinning her on the platform. Her hair flew loose, her face lit with joy. And then it came, the word that hit Sam like a blade of ice driven straight through his chest. Dad. Sam's body locked in place, his breath caught, his eyes widened on the scene before him, raw and jagged as an open wound. That one word had carried him through nights of sand and gunfire, the only warmth he had left. And now, that same word belonged to another man. He tried to move closer, but his legs turned to stone. Grace was laughing, wrapped in another man's embrace. Happiness poured out of her, but not for him. Pain surged in his chest, sharp and merciless, as if shrapnel were tearing him apart from the inside. Anna, his ex-wife, appeared behind them, a grey sweater, a guarded face. Her eyes brushed his for a fleeting second, filled with unease and defense, before shifting quickly to the man holding their daughter. She gave him a smile that cut colder than any battlefield silence. Sam wanted to shout, to call Grace's name, but his throat locked, and only a broken rasp came out. Around him the platform bustled with footsteps and voices, yet inside him the world froze. One still frame, the soldier home from war standing alone, watching the daughter he loved more than life call another man Dad. His fists clenched until nails bit skin. His mind spun back to the desert nights when he whispered Grace's name to survive. Now that memory was ripped away with a single misplaced word. His body shook, his heart in shards, but his eyes never left her, not for a single breath. The platform glowed in a haze of yellow lights, blurred like fractured memory. A father home from war now stood at the edge of a harsher fight, the battle to keep a place in his own child's heart. And in that moment, Sam understood the real war was never in the desert. It was right here, in the place he once called home. The street in Havenwood was supposed to feel familiar, but tonight it pressed on Sam's chest like something foreign. The old maples that once shaded his porch stood thin now, weeds crawling up the walk. The white house with the peeling wooden porch was still there, but it was no longer the place he returned to after long shifts. No longer the place where Grace came running to grab his hand. Sam stopped at the steps, his worn pack dragging heavy on his shoulder, his heart pounding like a man about to step into an ambush. His rough hand trembled as he raised it and knocked. The sound echoed through the still air like a warning that the truth on the other side would not be kind. The door opened. Mark Reynolds filled the frame. The same man who had held Grace at the station. The man she had called Dad. Mark wore a white shirt, the top button undone, the faint smell of whiskey on his breath. His eyes slid over Sam with open contempt before curling into a half smile, the kind meant to push a man back from his own doorstep. "What do you want?" Mark asked, his low voice edged with challenge. Sam swallowed hard, the knot in his throat rising. The words, "I'm home," burned on his tongue but refused to come out. Instead, what left his mouth was raw and broken. "I want to see my daughter." Mark lifted his brows, leaning his shoulder into the doorframe as if to block the way. Before Sam could move, Anna appeared from inside. She wore a grey sweater, her hair tied back, her face thinner than he remembered. Her eyes met his, unsteady for a heartbeat, then hardened. "Sam, you can't come in," she said, her voice quiet but sharp. The air in Sam's chest froze solid. He looked past her into the house, the living room he knew, the old sofa, the picture Grace had drawn still hanging on the wall. Everything still there, but it felt locked behind glass. He was standing outside, not allowed to step in. "This is my house," Sam forced the words, his voice rough as gravel. Anna raised her chin, her gaze unflinching. "No, Sam, you left. For 2 years we've built a life here. You don't have a place in it anymore." The words struck like a hammer. Sam staggered, half a step, his eyes wide in disbelief. 2 years of survival, carried only by the thought of coming back to his family. And now, the woman he had loved most told him he no longer belonged. Mark crossed his arms, smirking. "You heard her. Don't make this harder. Grace needs stability. She has a family here. I'm the one providing it." Sam's hand shook with rage. He wanted to push forward, to take back what was his, but then he saw her. Grace, a small face peeking from the staircase behind Anna, her brown eyes wide with hesitation and fear. She looked at him not as a father returned, but as a stranger at the door. The sight stopped him cold. He drew in a ragged breath, swallowing the cry that tore at his chest. His voice cracked. "I just want to see my daughter." Anna shook her head, her words sharp as steel. "Don't you understand? Grace is fine. You coming back will only break her world apart." The door began to close. The space between Sam and his family shrank into a sliver of darkness. The yellow glow of the living room spilled across his face, dull and heavy, before vanishing as the door shut hard. The lock clicked, final and cold. Sam stood on the porch, left outside his own home like a man who never belonged. The night wind slid across the porch, carrying the smell of rotted wood and rusted iron. Sam's grip tightened on the strap of his pack, his eyes fixed on the door that would not open. His chest was stone, each heartbeat a jagged stab. A soldier who had stood steady under fire now trembled at a locked door. And in that moment he understood. He had become a stranger, in the only home he ever fought for. The next morning, Havenwood lay under a grey sky, the drizzle hanging thin over the streets like a film of smoke. Sam Dalton pulled his collar high and walked fast down the main road, toward the town's administrative building. The old brick wall out front was chipped and peeling, the American flag above it faded, moving weak in the wind. He'd walked past this place before, back when life was simpler, filing for Grace's birth certificate, signing the mortgage papers on the little house. Now his boots carried him inside with the weight of a man about to face a sentence already written. Inside, the front desk sat empty, except for the rattle of an old fan and the smell of damp paper. A young clerk with slicked back hair looked up from a stack of files. Sam gave his name, his request, records on his marriage, his custody rights. The clerk blinked, uneasy, then disappeared into the back. Sam stood with his fists tight, his heart hammering. Each minute waiting felt like another long watch in the desert. At last a thin folder slid across the counter. Sam opened it, his eyes fixed on the typed pages, the messy signatures, and his chest locked tight. Divorce papers. The date marked clear right in the stretch when he'd gone dark after the ambush. Below, custody documents giving Anna full control of Grace and naming a substitute guardian, Mark Reynolds. The blood in Sam's veins froze solid. He read the lines again and again, his vision blurring. The date fell exactly when his unit had been listed, temporarily missing. In the desert, he was still alive, still fighting. But here at home, the paperwork had written him off as a ghost a father erased. His hand slammed against the desk, the sound jolting the young clerk. "Who gave permission to file this while I was still alive? I never agreed to divorce. I never gave up my daughter." Sam's voice cracked, raw with fury. The clerk stammered. "The file. The signature, sir. It says it's yours." Sam snatched the copy, eyes drilling into the scrawled name at the bottom. It looked like his, but it wasn't. Sloppy, rushed, wrong. He knew his own hand. This was forged. His fingers trembled, a storm of rage and helplessness all at once. "This is fake," he rasped through clenched teeth. "Somebody forged these papers." Silence pressed on the room. Only the soft scrape of paper as Sam flipped through the rest, stamped notaries, official seals, everything neat and clean. Too clean. Someone had paved this road carefully, laying every brick to push him out of his own daughter's life. In his head echoed Mark's smirk, Anna's cold words from the night before, "You don't have a right here anymore." Now he understood it wasn't just sentiment. The trap was legal, bound in ink and seal. They'd built the lie to make it look like he had never existed. Sam lifted his head, fire burning in his eyes, but the clerk looked away, shuffling the papers nervously. Sam's knuckles went white, gripping the desk. On the battlefield, he always knew where the enemy was. Here, in his own hometown, the enemy hid behind red stamps and forged signatures. He shoved the copies into his pack, his voice raw, nearly breaking. "I'll bring the truth out, no matter how deep they've buried it." He stepped out into the drizzle. The cold drops struck his face like tiny blades. Havenwood Street looked calm, ordinary. But in Sam's chest, a new war had started, the war against the paper tricks that had stolen his family. The evening in Havenwood dragged heavy. Anna had called Sam to dinner, maybe out of courtesy, maybe just so Grace wouldn't see her father standing out on the porch like a ghost. Sam stepped up onto the porch, his chest restless, suspicion coiled tight in his gut. The door opened, and the smell of food drifted out: roast meat, mashed potatoes, tomato sauce, scents he knew by heart, carrying him back to when the family was whole. But even inside that warmth, he felt like an uninvited guest. The dining room glowed under a yellow lamp, the old oak table still in its place. But the wedding photo of him and Anna was gone. In its place hung another frame, Grace in the middle, with Anna and Mark standing at her sides. Sam's chest clenched hard, like someone had scrubbed him out of the story inside his own house. Grace sat at the head of the table, clutching her doll. When Sam stepped in, she glanced his way for half a second, then turned her face aside. He lowered himself into the chair across from her, the distance across the table stretching like a trench line. He wanted to reach for her hand, but the gap was too wide. Anna served the plates in silence, her face drawn, her eyes never lingering on Sam for long. The air was thick, broken only by the soft clink of knife on porcelain. Sam kept looking at his daughter, hoping for a spark of warmth. But Grace bent her head, whispering to the doll, avoiding him. Mark Reynolds sat at the far end, relaxed, eating as if he owned the place. He kept up small talk with Anna, and every so often turned to Grace. "Eat up, kiddo. You need to grow strong." The word kiddo hit sharp, deliberate, twisting into Sam like a blade. Sam set down his fork, steadying himself. He looked at Grace and asked softly, "How have you been?" Still drawing. Her brown eyes flicked up for a breath. But before she could answer, Mark patted her shoulder. "She's into baseball now. I took her to practice last week. She's got a good swing." Sam swallowed hard, shame burning his throat. He dreamed of that day, taking Grace to the field, teaching her how to hold the bat, how to throw. That dream now belonged to someone else, while he sat and watched. Anna stared down at her plate, refusing both men's eyes. The room held three currents: Sam's silent rage, Mark's smug control, and Anna's weary avoidance. The meal dragged. Sam forced down a few bites, tasting nothing but bitterness. He listened as Mark talked, buying Grace clothes, picking her up at school, planning a camping trip. Each word landed like a slap, carving deeper the picture of Sam erased from his own daughter's life. Then came the moment that cut deepest. Grace reached for the bread, and Mark leaned in, laying his hand lightly on her shoulder. A simple touch, but his eyes locked on Sam, his smirk daring. Sam's fist shook around the fork. Every part of him wanted to rise, to shout that Grace was his daughter, not Mark's. But Grace's eyes lifted just then, wide and uncertain, afraid. The anger caught in his throat. He knew if he let the fire break loose, the one most hurt would be her. He drew a long breath, pressing the rage down. Humiliation seared his chest, but he sat still, swallowing it whole. Under the yellow light of that room, the soldier who had lived through gunfire now sat silent, watching another man wear the role of father right before his eyes. And Grace, the child he loved more than life, still turned away, unable to meet him. The kitchen air hung like lead. The clink of knife and fork still came from Mark's side of the table, but to Sam every sound struck like a hammer against his pride. His hand tightened until his knuckles turned white, then he forced himself to release, setting the fork down gently, as if even a loud noise might snap his control. He drew a long breath and fixed his eyes on Grace, head lowered, shoulders trembling beneath Mark's possessive hand. A fire raged in his chest, urging him to stand, to knock that hand away, to lift his daughter into his arms and say, "I'm your father. I always was." But the soldier in him, the man who had learned the cost of timing, knew one wrong move here would only deepen her fear and kill his chance to reclaim the truth. He swallowed hard and rose from his chair. The scrape of wood on the floor cut sharp through the silence. Anna looked up, startled, while Mark smirked, his words dripping with mockery. "Dinner's not finished, Sam," like a victor taunting the fallen. Sam didn't answer. He pulled on his faded field jacket and walked out. The door closed behind him, cutting him off from the yellow light and the familiar smell of food. The night air struck cold across his face, but it steadied him. Havenwood was hushed, the street lamps throwing a dull orange glow over the wet pavement. Sam's steps were slow, heavy as stone. Anna's words echoed in his mind, "You don't have a right here anymore." And then the image Mark's hand resting on Grace's shoulder, that taunting grin, pain and fury twisted together, tightening his chest. Yet with each step, his stride grew firmer. From the ashes of humiliation, a new resolve burned. If he couldn't win his family back with words, then he would fight for them with the law. He ducked into a small cafe on the corner. The place was worn down, a few tired neon lights flickering. He chose a seat by the window and ordered his coffee black. Setting his pack on the chair beside him, he pulled out the folder he'd taken from the town office the day before. Divorce papers, custody orders, his name forged across them, proof of a trap carefully laid. Sam stared at the pages, and in his mind saw a battlefield ambush, enemies laying charges in the sand, waiting for a misstep. This was no different. Not bullets, but laws. Not shrapnel, but forged signatures. And if he wasn't careful, everything would be lost. The coffee burned bitter down his throat, sharpening his resolve. He opened his notebook and began a list. Find a lawyer he could trust. Reach out to old comrades who could testify. Trace who stood behind the forgery. It would be long and it would be draining, but at least it was a way forward. A path, not another explosion of anger wasted in Anna's dining room. Near closing time, as he gathered his papers, a slip of paper slid loose from the folder. Sam bent to pick it up. It was a short financial contract, tucked between the divorce and custody forms. The ink was fresh, the name Mark Reynolds clear in the recipient's line, along with a sum transferred from a local real estate firm. Sam's pulse kicked. His eyes locked on the date. It matched exactly the day his divorce papers were finalized. He sat still, the page trembling in his hand. The pieces clicked together. This wasn't only forged paperwork. There were financial ties, a whole chain of transactions hidden beneath. Mark hadn't just moved in on Anna and Grace. He was after something more, something big enough to twist law and conscience across the whole town. For the first time since he'd stepped back into Havenwood, Sam saw the path laid out before him. He was no longer just the man pushed aside. He was the only one who could tear the mask off this lie. Morning broke grey over Havenwood, the drizzle hanging light as ash across the streets. Sam Dalton walked out of the cafe with his pack heavy on his back, the folder of crooked papers and that financial contract tucked inside. He hadn't slept, dark circles cut under his eyes, but the fire in him still burned. All he needed, he told himself, was a few people to believe him, a couple of old faces willing to stand up and say he was telling the truth. But as he made his way down the streets he had once called his own, Sam felt another line being drawn, and this time, it seemed the whole town was standing on the other side. At the grocery store, old Mr. Milner, who for years had greeted him with a warm handshake, gave him only a quick nod and turned his back, stacking boxes that didn't need stacking. Near the produce stand, a group of women whispered, eyes flicking towards Sam. Their hushed words pricked like needles. He left without a word, left his wife and child to fend for themselves. He slowed, but when his eyes met theirs they ducked down, pretending to study the tomatoes. Passing the bar at the corner, Sam caught a laugh meant for him. A man he'd once known in high school, now heavy and unshaven, tipped his chin toward Sam, shaking his head. "Too late, Dalton. Another man stepped in when you disappeared. What do you expect now?" The words cut deep, bitter as shrapnel. Sam swallowed, the lump rising hard in his throat. It was clear Mark had moved fast. The man hadn't just taken Sam's place in the house, he'd planted himself in the mouths of the town. Rumors spread quick as prairie fire. Sam had abandoned his family. Sam had lost his mind in the war. Folks no longer looked at him as a veteran who had given years in the desert. They looked at him as a man not to be trusted, a shadow with a past best avoided. He ducked into the old coffee shop where he used to sit with his unit during leave. The owner, who used to call him Sammy Boy, slid his cup onto the table without a smile, without a word. The air was thick, silent, foreign. Sam sat a while, drinking in quiet, his back tight like he was under fire he couldn't see. Then he left, leaving coins on the table. On the road, he spotted Joe, a friend from the old days, a teammate from high school ball. Sam quickened his step, clapped a hand to Joe's shoulder. "Joe, it's me, Sam." Joe turned, eyes uncertain, then shifted away. "I'm busy, Sam. Don't make this harder." And he walked off, leaving Sam alone on the street. The sense of being cut off pressed down hard. For 2 years he had fought in the desert, believing he was guarding this very place. Now he was home, and the people he had defended turned their backs. The loneliness dug in, deeper than any shell blast, carving out a hollow inside him. By dusk, Sam trudged back to the cheap rented room at the edge of town. The last light painted the roofs in gold, but it wasn't the warmth of welcome, it was the cold glare of a spotlight on a stranger. He unpacked his folder on the wobbling wooden table, pages of forged signatures, stamps that carried the weight of law but no truth. And behind every line, every seal, he saw the same face, Mark Reynolds. Not just in his house, but now across the whole community, Mark was writing Sam out of existence. Sam clenched his fists, eyes blazing. He knew if he lunged headlong, if he fought with raw anger, he would break himself right here in his own soil. But if he wanted to win Grace back, if he wanted to prove the truth, he would have to be patient. He would have to peel back each layer, trace every lead, one by one. As the streetlights clicked on outside, their glow falling in patches across the stack of papers, Sam made a vow to himself. He would not let this town turn him into a ghost. It was a cold, clear Saturday morning in Havenwood, the kind of day when the sky was bright, but the air still carried a bite. Sam Dalton had made up his mind to give the whole day to Grace. After weeks of being turned away, Anna had finally relented, maybe out of pity, maybe because she saw Sam wasn't giving up. He took Grace to the town park, the same place he used to bring her when she was small. The gravel path was unchanged, the maples standing bare after winter. He bought her a vanilla ice cream and sat her down on the old wooden bench by the pond. His heart trembled as he watched her lick at the cone, her hair moving in the breeze, such a simple picture, the kind he had dreamed of during 2 years in the desert. He tried to start light. "Grace, you remember last time we flew a kite here? You ran so fast I nearly lost the string." She hesitated, blinking, then gave a small nod, though her eyes slid away as if she were afraid of touching the memory. Sam swallowed the knot in his throat and forced a smile, spinning more stories, scraps of the past. Slowly, Grace let out a small laugh, but it vanished in a breath because someone else had arrived. Mark Reynolds strode toward them, all easy confidence. Leather jacket, hands in pockets, that half-smile curling his mouth. "Well, look at you two out here," he said, voice pitched between friendly and mocking. Sam stiffened. Grace flinched, turning toward Mark. Mark crouched to her level and pulled a bright, soft baseball from his pocket. "Forgot about practice today? Dad promised you we'd get some extra swings in." The word Dad rang sharp, a blade sliding between Sam's ribs. Grace clutched the ball, her eyes darting between the two men. Sam kept his tone steady, speaking to his daughter. "Grace, today I wanted to show you the little bridge at the far end of the park. You used to love it there." "One." But Mark gave a low laugh, his eyes fixed on the soldier, trying to hold a moment. "Sam, maybe you should let her stick with her routine. I'm the one who's here every day. I know what's best for her." The words fell like a hammer. Grace looked at Sam, her eyes clouded, lips working as if caught between worlds. And then she spoke, barely above a whisper. "Dad, Sam." 2 words that cut deeper than any rejection. Not only did she give him the title, she split it in 2, carving a line between him and the man beside her. In only 2 years, he had become a shadow in his daughter's life, a name that needed a qualifier. Sam felt himself fracture inside, the sound of it sharp and merciless. This was the little girl he had once carried in his arms, lulled to sleep with war stories, softened into bedtime tales. Now she had to mark him apart, a father in name but not in presence. Mark straightened, his hand falling onto Grace's shoulder, his smile wide with triumph. "See, she knows who's really been here." Sam's fists clenched until his knuckles went pale. Every muscle begged to explode, to rip that hand off her shoulder, to shout the truth in Mark's face. But he held back. In front of Grace, he could not lose what little dignity he had left. He drew a long breath, forcing the fury back down into his chest. Grace's eyes lingered on him, her lips pressed tight. For a flicker, Sam thought he saw pain there, but it vanished as Mark's grip guided her away. Sam stood rooted, alone in the open park, the wind tearing through the bare branches. He had once believed the battlefield was the only place where men broke. Now he knew better. It was here, in the quiet of his own hometown, where the war cut deepest. The night in Havenwood was sharp with cold, the mist hanging low and white across the street. Sam Dalton stood frozen on the porch of the house that used to be his shoulders cast long under the weak yellow light of the street lamp. The white house with its worn shingles still glowed from the living room, warm light spilling through the windows. But to Sam, it wasn't shelter anymore. It was a fortress he couldn't enter. His grip tightened on the strap of his pack, his chest pounding with memories. Grace running down the hall into his arms, Anna's voice calling supper. Now all of it lived only in his head. The present was nothing but a wooden door closed tight, colder than any trench he had ever known. The wind cut through his coat, damp with earth and chill. Sam stepped close to the door, pressed his ear against it, his heartbeat drumming like battle fire. And then it came the sound that dropped him to his knees. Grace crying, small, broken sobs, each one carving into his chest like a blade. He pressed his rough hand against the wood, as if he could push through, reach her. Every sob was a cut deeper than the last. He knocked softly. Once, twice. Silence. Then the heavy thud of footsteps inside. The door opened a crack, revealing Mark Reynolds. He filled the doorway, eyes cold, that mocking half-smile on his face. "What are you doing here, Sam?" The words came low, sharp. Sam swallowed hard, his voice rough. "I heard her crying. I just want to see Grace. She needs me." Mark raised an eyebrow, leaning into the frame like a guard. "She doesn't need you. She's tired. Anna and I can handle it. Go home." Sam's teeth clenched, his whole body wound tight as a bowstring. From upstairs, Grace's voice broke out again, clearer this time, a shaky cry, "Mom!" Sam's heart exploded inside him. He moved forward, but Mark blocked the way. His wide hand braced against the door. "Not one step further. Dalton, this isn't your house anymore." The words cut colder than any desert night. Through the sliver of space, Sam could see only the stairs leading up to Grace's room. He pictured her curled on the bed, clutching her old doll, tears streaking her face while her father stood outside, locked away. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from a helplessness that gnawed bone deep. "You're keeping a father from comforting his own child," Sam growled, voice low, heavy as steel. Mark only shrugged, his grin widening. "No, I'm protecting her stability. You're the one who'd tear it apart. Learn when to walk away." The door slammed shut, the deadbolt snapping like a gunshot. Hope died with the sound. Sam pressed his forehead to the wood, his fist clenched until blood welled at the knuckles. Behind the wall, Grace's crying faded, softer, until all that remained was the wild hammer of his own heart. The porch fell into shadow. Sam staggered back, his vision blurred, his steps heavy. Out in the dark he was nothing more than a shape without voice, cut out of the life he had built. On the battlefield, he had watched men fall beside him and carried on. But never had he felt this powerless, hearing his daughter cry within reach and being forbidden to touch her. He turned, walking slow down the silent street. The lamp stretched his shadow long across the pavement, the mark of a wanderer without a home. And with every step, Sam knew he was losing more than walls and roof. He was losing his daughter's heart, every sob pushing him further into the dark. Morning in Havenwood lay under a thick sheet of fog, the sun cutting through just enough to cast a pale wash of white over Main Street. Sam Dalton rose from the narrow bed in his cheap rented room, his eyes still heavy from a night with no sleep. Grace's crying still rang in his head, pinning him against the wall in helpless silence. But alongside the pain, something else had hardened. That financial contract he'd found among the files would not leave his mind. If Mark Reynolds could conjure forged papers, then someone else had to be standing behind him. And the way to rip the mask off was through money. Money always left a trail. The Havenwood Bank stood at the corner of the main square, a red brick building with tall glass doors that gleamed in the grey light. Sam drew a deep breath before walking inside. The air smelled of old carpet and paper bills. The counters lined the room in neat rows, clerks in blue shirts wearing the same professional, guarded faces. Sam stepped forward, laying down his veteran ID and the few documents he still carried. His voice was rough but steady. "I need information on some questionable transactions. I have a right to it. It involves custody of my daughter." The teller blinked, startled, then asked for specifics. Sam slid the contract across, his finger pressing the line with Mark Reynolds' name. For a flash, the woman's eyes flickered, but her face smoothed over again. "I'm sorry, Mr. Dalton. Account information is confidential. Without a court order, I can't provide anything." Sam ground his teeth, holding back the surge of anger. He lowered his voice, leaning close, the plea edged with iron. "Listen to me. I gave 2 years of my life in the desert so this town could sleep safe. Now my family is being stolen by a fraud. I just need one truth. Did that money in this contract actually land in Reynolds' account?" The clerk's hand trembled faintly as she held the paper. After a long pause, she glanced around, then bent toward her screen. Fingers tapped fast. The glow lit her uneasy eyes. At last she gave the smallest nod, whispering, "There's a string of transfers from the same real estate company out of the next county. The amounts, not small." Sam's pulse slammed in his chest. He had found the vein. "I need copies, dates, sums. I'll take this to court," he pressed, his words nearly an order. But another voice cut him off, a deeper, firmer tone. The bank manager, broad in build, had stepped up behind him. "Mr. Dalton, I'm afraid you're crossing a line. We cannot allow you to access customer records. You'll need to leave now." Sam turned, fire in his eyes. "Do you understand? This isn't just money. This is my daughter's life. I'm not leaving until I have the truth." His hand slammed against the counter, the crack echoing across the lobby. Conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward him. The manager's face hardened. He signaled, and 2 security men came forward. They were thick-shouldered, uniforms stiff with starch, the smell of sweat and fabric sharp. "Sir, you need to leave. Now." Sam stood tall, chest rising, his gaze locked on the manager. One more second, and they'd have him pinned. He knew it. This wasn't a fight he could win with fists. He drew a long breath, shoved the contract back into his coat, and let the guards take his arms. His boots dragged across the tile, each step pounding out his fury. The glass doors swung open, and the cold light cut across his face. The push of the guards sent him stumbling onto the sidewalk. The door slammed shut behind him, with a sound like steel locking away hope. Passers-by slowed, watching. A few whispers drifted. "See? The soldier's making trouble again." Sam stood rooted, his breath hot as fire in the cold air. He had been thrown out, but he carried something out with him, knowledge. Mark Reynolds was taking money from a shady real estate firm. And with that thread, Sam knew he was closer to the one pulling the strings, the one who had built the trap meant to erase his life. Rain fell light over Havenwood that afternoon, each drop on the tin roofs, beating a steady rhythm like a drum far off. Sam Dalton sat in a back booth of a cafe at the end of the street, his eyes tired but still burning. Across from him sat a man with salt and pepper hair, shoulders straight, his posture crisp. James Porter, an attorney, but also a veteran who had once served in Iraq. Porter had left the service earlier, gone to law school, and returned to practice here in town. Sam remembered him from a few memorial gatherings for fallen soldiers. Now, cornered, this was the only name he trusted. Porter studied him for a long moment, then spoke, his voice slow but firm. "I believe you, Dalton. I've heard the rumors, but looking you in the eye, I know they're lies. Problem is, court doesn't care about belief, it cares about evidence." Sam nodded, his hands laced tight. "I've got a financial contract tied to Mark, and I'm certain my signature on the divorce is forged, but the bank threw me out, and the whole town's turned its back." Porter sipped his coffee, eyes narrowing. "You've lived combat. You know better than to charge a kill zone without a plan. This is the same. If you want to win your daughter back, if you want to expose Reynolds, you've got to be patient. Collect every piece. Courts need a chain of behavior, not just a single page." The words felt like a compass in the fog. Sam drew a long breath, his chest steadier now. "You mean start watching him, recording everything?" Porter nodded. "Exactly. Every word, every move, every overstep. You've got a phone. Use it. Record. Photograph. Don't let rage ruin it. Let the truth speak for itself." Sam sat still, listening to the rain on the awning. His heart eased for the first time since coming home, not with anger, but with purpose. He wasn't just a man shut out, he had a way forward. That night, back in his rented room, he spread papers across the old table under the weak lamp, his notebook thick with scribbled lines. He checked his phone, the recording app, the camera. A plan began to take shape. Every time Mark put his hand into Grace's life, every time he spoke to cut Sam down, every time he showed his true face, Sam would capture it, piece by piece, until the full picture stood undeniable. The next day, he began. At the park, when Mark insisted on teaching Grace how to swing, Sam stood off at a distance, recording. On tape, Reynolds mocked him, the absent one, a father who can't be trusted. That afternoon, Sam walked by his old porch, leaving a camera hidden. Through the lens he caught Mark's mask slipping, shouting at Anna once the door shut. Grace's cries tangled in the noise. The polished image of a stable home cracked wide open. Each night, Sam returned to his room, transferring everything onto a separate hard drive, files labeled by date, by hour, with notes scrawled beside them. Photos, audio clips. His wall of evidence began to grow, each brick stacked with care. Where there had been helplessness, there was now cold focus. The pain still lived, the memory of Grace whispering, "Dad, Sam," the sound of her crying behind a locked door, but this time Sam wasn't alone. Porter stood with him. The truth itself stood with him. In the dark room, the blue glow of the screen lit his worn face, steady and relentless. Sam Dalton, a man who had survived war, was stepping into another one. Not fought with rifles, but with law, with patience, with every small piece of proof, to win back his daughter, to strip the mask off the man who had stolen his family. Grace's birthday dawned with pale light, sunlight slipping through the living room windows of the old house, catching on dust motes drifting in the air. Sam Dalton stood outside, a gift clutched in his hands, a small camera, something Grace had wished for long ago. He had planned it carefully. A simple cake baked by his own hands, a few streamers and balloons bought from a shop near the train station. To Sam, this day was more than a birthday. It was a chance to mend what had been torn, to remind his daughter that he was still here, still her father from the depths of her memory. Inside, Anna hovered in the living room, worn down but steady, watching over the details. Mark Reynolds moved easily through the space in a pressed suit, as if he owned it. Grace ran around the room, her eyes glowing at the colors of the balloons, but the glow dimmed as soon as Mark caught her hand and pulled her close. "Listen to your dad," he said, loud enough for Sam to hear from the doorway, soft enough to command the girl's obedience. Grace froze, her small eyes fixed on Mark with uneasy respect. Sam stepped inside, the gift still in his hands. He drew a deep breath, forcing down the storm in his chest. "Happy birthday, Grace," he said, slow and steady. Grace turned toward him, but her eyes were guarded, uncertain, as if they carried the weight of the word dad, already given to someone else. Mark wasted no time. He lifted his voice, taking the floor. "Folks, today there's only one father here. Grace, don't forget that." The words landed heavy, his smirk aimed at Sam, his voice meant to claim the whole room. A few neighbors and Anna's distant friends nodded uneasily, while Grace stood stiff at the cake, her eyes flickering toward Sam but her feet refusing to move. Anger surged through Sam. 2 years gone, every mile, every dream of reunion, shredded by one moment of showmanship. His chest hammered, his muscles taut. He wanted to tear across the room, to shout in Mark's face, to tell him to take his hand off his daughter and never speak of her like a trophy. But Grace's eyes stopped him. They were wide, confused, scared. That look reminded Sam of the battlefield moments when one wrong move could shatter everything. He closed his eyes, shoved the fury down, and drew in a long breath. Mark saw the anger. The grin on his face widened, feeding on Sam's restraint. He gripped Grace's shoulder tighter, pulling her closer as if to stake his claim. The gesture screamed power, screamed ownership, daring Sam to act. And in that instant, Sam felt his chest tighten, the frustration rising like fire and despair curling around it. He took a step back, his hand crushing the wrapping paper of the gift until it crumpled. He closed his eyes, whispering inside his head the same way he had whispered in foxholes overseas. Hold steady, wait, endure. Violence would only wound his daughter more. Patience was his weapon now. Anna's gaze flicked across the room. Her expression stayed cold, but in her eyes there was a crack, a shadow of doubt at Mark's display. She said nothing, but her silence was its own signal, something Sam tucked away for later. Grace fidgeted, her small hands twisting together. Her eyes darted between the two men, her lips trembling, caught between fear and longing. She didn't yet understand the weight pressing down on the room, but she could feel it, and it pressed on her like stone. Sam set the gift down on the table, careful, firm. It was more than a present, it was a marker, a promise. His love wasn't gone, it wasn't shaken. He gave a small nod, his face calm, his body controlled, like a soldier who had learned the hard lessons of patience. The room was filled with the soft glow of afternoon light, but under it the tension pressed hard, choking. Sam knew he had won a small battle today. He had kept his anger in check, but the war itself had just begun. The birthday song played, laughter rang hollow, but to Sam it was only noise over the sharp edge of truth. He watched his daughter, he watched the man who dared to call himself father, and he came to one hard conclusion. If he wanted Grace back, he would have to fight with patience, with proof, with quiet persistence. He could never give up. The night in Havenwood stretched endless. The weak yellow glow from the small bar flickered against the old brick walls, reflecting off scratched tabletops like reminders of every scar in Sam Dalton's own life. He sat in a corner, silent, eyes locked on Mark Reynolds. The man lounged with a few old buddies, laughing, a bourbon glass heavy in his hand, eyes red with drink and weariness. Sam hadn't come to pick a fight. He hadn't come to posture. He was there with the instincts of a soldier, that sixth sense honed by 2 years of combat where there were loose lips, there was truth. Mark laughed louder as the drinks piled up, telling stories of the town, mixing jokes with half-remembered tales. But as the night wore on, his words began to loosen, his voice slipping careless. Sam leaned forward, every nerve tight. Then he heard it. If it weren't for Grace, things would be complicated. I need to keep the kid close to Anna, so no one can touch the inheritance. The words stumbled out, low, half meant for the man beside him, but they landed sharp in Sam's ears. It was like a jolt of electricity. Horror and hope crashed in his chest. Every syllable hit like a bullet, yet everyone opened the door Sam had been waiting on. Proof, the first crack in the wall. Mark wasn't a father, he was a vulture, keeping Grace for money. Sam's hands clenched, his breath steady only through sheer force. Mark's friend chuckled, nodding along, never realizing Sam was listening, recording the whole scene in his mind. Mark kept talking, spilling more about the financial contract, about keeping Grace as security for Anna, about how he had twisted the paperwork to cement his place. Sam took in every word, his eyes fixed, his memory sharp as a camera lens. Each line would become a brick in the case to come. Pain washed over him. 2 years gone. Nights eaten alive by longing, only to come home and see his daughter reduced to a pawn, a chip in a game of greed. Yet through that pain came a spark of hope. For the first time, he held something solid, something Mark could never unsay. Sam slid his phone out, quiet, snapping a few photos from the shadows. His hands shook not from fear, but from the storm he held inside. Rage, sorrow, resolve, all tangled. This was only the beginning. Each move from here would have to be careful, each step weighed, because Mark was not the kind of man to give up ground easily. The night air drifted through the bar window, carrying smoke and stale liquor, brushing Sam's face with its cold bite. It cleared his head. In that moment, everything sharpened. Grace was being used. Every tender gesture, every staged moment with her, was nothing more than armor for Mark's control, a shield for Anna's inheritance. And the man across the room wasn't even trying to hide it anymore, not in his drunken pride. Sam took a long sip of cold black coffee, steadying himself. The plan had to be exact. The evidence had to be airtight. Patience would be his weapon. Grace was not a pawn. She was his daughter. And he would fight quietly, deliberately, until he won her back. The bar hummed with low laughter, glasses clinking, Mark's sloppy voice carrying on. Beneath it all, Sam's heartbeat thudded like a war drum. Tonight had changed everything. The plot had cracked open. And for the first time, the thought rose strong in his chest. He might just have a way to beat this. Sam Dalton rose from his chair, eyes cold, resolve heavy in his bones. This time, nothing would stop him from fighting for Grace. The sheriff's office was cramped, the fluorescent lights buzzing cold above a scarred wooden desk, every scratch and fingerprint glinting under the glass. Sam Dalton walked in carrying a thick file, photos, recordings, notes on every wrong move Mark Reynolds had made, gathered piece by piece over long weeks. His heart pounded, every beat reminding him this might be his only chance to claw justice back for his daughter Grace, still trapped in the house Mark had turned into his fortress. The sheriff, a tall man with thick glasses and a hard stare, leaned back and eyed Sam with a shrug. "What do you want, Dalton?" His voice was low, but suspicion edged every word. Sam laid the file on the desk, his own voice steady but tight, holding back the roar inside him. "I've got proof against Mark Reynolds. He's twisting custody, using my daughter as a shield for money and power." "Yes." The sheriff flipped through a few pages, glanced at a photo, his face flickering with interest for a split second before hardening. His tone dropped, sharp and warning. "You know I've known Mark a long time. Maybe you ought to rethink this. Not everything gets settled with paperwork." Sam swallowed hard, a wave of despair rising. 2 years in combat, through shells and screams, had never made him feel this small. But here, across from the law itself, he felt like an ant staring up at a giant. Mark Reynolds had friends in high places, and that network made him untouchable. Sam's chest burned with helpless rage, but he couldn't let it out. The sheriff tapped the file. "I'm not saying you're wrong, but we can't act on recordings and snapshots, and if you're serious about protecting your daughter, you'd better tread carefully. One wrong move, and it's you in trouble." The warning sat heavy in the air, colder than steel. Sam saw it plain. One phone call from the shadows and his whole case could vanish. He stared back at the man across the desk, forcing the anger down, speaking low. "All I want is to protect my little girl. That's my right." The sheriff gave a short laugh, thin as ice. "Rights or not, Dalton, that's not what runs the world. It's money, it's power, it's who you know. You ought to know that by now." Sam's eyes swept the room-old photos on the wall, handshakes between the sheriff and Mark, smiles caught on camera, all the ties he couldn't cut, all the deals he couldn't prove. The weight of it pressed down, the whole system stacked against him, but inside him, something lit. He thought of Grace, looking at the world with her clear eyes, never knowing why her father, the man she had waited for, was pushed aside. Despair hardened into fire, smoldering under his skin, pushing him to keep searching, to find the cracks in the wall Mark and the sheriff had built. Sam walked out, clutching the file tight against his chest. The rain-wet pavement echoed his heavy steps. Gasoline hung in the air, the wind biting cold across the empty streets. Loneliness pressed him flat, no friends left, no law on his side, just a father and the will to protect his child. Each step hammered the truth. This wasn't just a fight with Mark, it was a fight with the system propping him up. Storefront lights threw long, twisted shadows across his face as he walked. They looked like warnings, stretching out ahead on the road to come danger, corruption, injustice, waiting at every turn. But Sam knew one thing. Despair had never stopped a soldier from fighting. And now, the fire to protect his daughter, and the belief that somewhere, somehow, justice still lived, that was enough. Sam Dalton drew a deep breath, lifted the file in his hand, and stepped into the night, ready to keep fighting with everything he had left. Late afternoon light slanted through the living room window, laying thin stripes across the old flowered carpet where Grace often played. The 8-year-old sat cross-legged, a blank sheet of paper spread before her, a pencil trembling in her hand. Inside her small chest, the world felt tangled. She remembered the warmth of Sam Dalton's face, the father she missed, but alongside it stood Mark, the man she called Dad every day. Today, though, a question had begun to grow like a seed inside her heart. Why isn't Dad Sam allowed to be with me? Grace lifted her eyes toward her mother. Anna moved quickly around the kitchen, wiping down the table as if trying to dodge the silence. The question broke that silence wide open. "Mom, why can't Dad Sam be with me?" The words came small, but they carried weight, carrying the ache of empty days. Anna froze, her back stiff. She turned away, her face tightening, her voice caught. We just need to focus on the present, Grace," she said, her tone brittle, but her eyes gave her away. Grace saw the dodge, and in her young heart, she knew something was being hidden. Confusion washed over her. She bent down, pencil scratching, drawing on the page. The lines were clumsy but full of meaning, circles, angles, little shapes carrying her storm of feelings. Slowly, 3 figures took shape. A small girl, a kind-faced man holding her hand, and another man drawn more stern, standing apart. She shaded Sam with messy brown hair, soft eyes, a hand reaching for hers. Mark she drew at a distance, one arm like a barrier, face drawn with power instead of love. Anna stepped closer, glanced at the drawing, and her face tightened. Her eyes twitched, as if realizing her efforts to bury the truth were unraveling right under her daughter's hand. Grace lifted her pencil again, pressing harder, adding details things Sam had once meant to her. A chair she remembered curling into when he told stories. A lamp that cast its glow when he spoke in his gentle voice. The little things she carried in memory, or maybe only in hope. She didn't say more. She just looked at Anna, her eyes heavy with questions her mother couldn't answer. Inside that look was longing for the man she had waited on for 2 years, who had missed every milestone, but who still lived in her. Outside, Sam sat in his truck, eyes fixed on that very window. He didn't know what Grace was asking, didn't know she was reaching for him in her confusion. He only saw the faint figure of his daughter bent over her paper. His chest ached, a mix of sorrow and something fragile, almost forgotten hope. Grace kept drawing, adding piece after piece. The chair, the lamp, the small comforts she tied to Sam. Her pencil wasn't just marking paper, it was pulling her toward him, her own way of reaching back for the father she had lost to absence. Anna stood by, heavy with dread. She saw now what Mark's power games couldn't erase. No lie, no legal paper, no careful arrangement could fully bury the truth. Through innocence and instinct, Grace was beginning to know who her real father was. The question, why can't Dad Sam be with me? It would not fade. It was the first spark, the beginning of something bigger. From the truck, Sam watched, drawing in a deep breath. He could not hear the words, could not see the lines of the drawing, but he felt it. Something had shifted. His daughter was searching. She was putting him back in the middle of her family, if only in crayon and pencil. The pain of years lost still cut deep, but for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of light. Grace was finding him again in her imagination, in her heart, and one day soon, in her life. Sam Dalton drove his old car down Havenwood's gravel roads, hands gripping the wheel tight, his mind caught in a storm that ran hot and cold. 2 weeks of shadowing, recording, photographing, and stacking evidence against Mark Reynolds had taught him one thing: he couldn't keep fighting alone. Every step he took, Mark had already fenced in, through neighbors, friends, even the local officials. Time was bleeding away, and with it, his chance to win back Grace. If he wanted justice, if he wanted his daughter, he needed a different weapon: light. He needed to make the story public. A name surfaced in his memory: Danny Hayes, once his brother-in-arms in Iraq, now a reporter for the local magazine. Danny knew Sam. He knew the cost men carried home from war. And in town, Danny's byline carried enough weight to keep a story from being buried. Sam pulled up in front of the small cafe where the two of them used to sit after long patrols, drinking bitter coffee and trading truths no outsider could understand. His thumb hovered over the phone before he sent the message. When Danny walked in tall, lean, sharp-eyed as ever, Sam didn't waste time. His voice came low and hard. "Danny, I need your help. Not for me, for my daughter. That man, Mark, he's got his claws in everything, and I need this story out in the open." Yesting. Danny watched him in silence for a beat, reading the anger, the loss, the last flicker of hope, all tangled in his friend's face. Then he nodded. "Show me everything." Sam spread it all across the table: letters, photographs, recordings, even copies of financial transfers he had managed to pull from the bank. They worked for hours, sorting, shaping, piecing together the story. For the first time in weeks, Sam didn't feel alone. Every photo, every page was more than evidence. It was a voice, a chance for the town to see the truth, to see what had been taken. Danny jotted notes in his little pad, his eyes brightening as he saw the weight of it. "This will shake the town, Sam. People are going to start asking questions about Mark." By the next morning, the article was on the front page of the local paper, short but sharp. Veteran returns to face family secrets, custody battles, and unseen struggles. Sam didn't sit at home to read it. He stood on the sidewalk outside the cafe, watching faces as folks picked up their copies, hearing the hum of whispers. The story was small, but the ripples were bigger than he imagined. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him now paused, looking at him with curiosity, even sympathy, some with shame in their eyes. Mark got the news before noon. A colleague called him, voice crackling down the line. His face flushed red, anger breaking over him as he clenched the phone until his knuckles went white. All his careful planning, all the paper walls he had built, were being cracked open by sunlight. For the first time, the control he clung to was slipping. Sam stood outside the cafe, listening to laughter, whispers, the stir of questions. Relief filled him, but so did caution. This was only the first step. The fight ahead would be long, messy, dangerous. But for the first time in months of humiliation and exile, Sam felt the strength of exposure, the power of truth laid bare. He had an ally now, and most of all, he had planted a seed. Grace would see, sooner or later, that her father had never abandoned her. The road ahead would still be hard, but Sam Dalton, for the first time in 2 years of battling in silence, no longer stood alone in the dark. He stepped out of the cafe, drew a deep breath, and looked down the street. Amid the pain and the loss, a faint light had broken through. Grace was still out there, and Sam was not going to quit. Morning light slipped through the tall windows of the small courthouse at the center of town, washing the stone steps and quiet hallways in a pale glow. The echo of footsteps carried through the corridors as clerks and townsfolk made their way toward the day's hearing. Sam Dalton stood at the door, gripping a thick case file packed with every scrap of proof he had gathered: copies of shady financial contracts, bank records with Reynolds' name stamped on them, photos, recordings, sworn statements. His heart hammered. Each beat reminded him that this might be the only day his daughter's future could be pulled back from the hands of the man who had stolen it. When Sam entered the courtroom, he felt the eyes on him. Some neighbors ducked their gaze. Others stared, curious, wary, half ashamed. At the counsel table, Danny Hayes stacked papers in careful order, the determination in his eyes plain. Across the aisle, Mark Reynolds sat tall, his suit crisp, his smile thin and taunting, as if the verdict had already been written in his favor. Anna sat behind him, her face still, her eyes restless with worry, torn between what she knew and what she feared. The judge rapped the gavel, and the room stilled until the only sounds left were the shuffle of papers and Sam's own ragged breath. He rose, his voice low but firm. "Your Honor, I present evidence that Mark Reynolds manipulated custody of my daughter, Grace Dalton, through fraudulent paperwork, hidden financial dealings, and direct coercion. My only purpose is to protect my child and see justice done." Mark was quick, his voice loud, sharp, meant for the room. "Your Honor, this is nothing but the outcry of a broken man. Dalton is a veteran scarred by war, unstable, lashing out, trying to shift blame for what he abandoned. He left, and I stepped in. That's the truth." The words stung, cutting deep, but Sam stayed steady. He knew everything depended on the paper in his hands and the voices lined up behind him. One by one, he laid it out. Contracts stamped with Mark's name, bank statements that lined up too neatly with custody filings. Recordings played low across the courtroom, Mark's own voice bragging, his threats caught raw. Witnesses followed, neighbors who had heard him, co-workers who had seen the money change hands. Each voice layered into a tide of proof, steady, unstoppable. Across the room, Mark's jaw tightened, his smile slipping, but his eyes stayed sharp, calculating, looking for a way out. Sam's gaze drifted to the gallery where Grace sat, her small hands knotted in her lap, eyes wide, caught between fear and wonder. She wasn't yet 10, but she knew this mattered. Sam drew breath, felt the weight settle heavy on his chest, and held his ground. Every word, every page, every sound clip was for her safety, her truth, her right to know who her father was. The minutes stretched into hours, each one felt like its own battle. Sam spoke little, letting the evidence do the fighting. He knew a single flare of anger, a slip of temper, could hand Reynolds the opening he wanted. But for the first time in months, Sam wasn't standing alone. The truth was at his side. Danny was at his side. The witnesses were at his side. In the dim golden light spilling through the windows, Sam Dalton clutched his case file, eyes locked on the judge. His pulse thundered, but his stance never broke. He had come to the last fight, where justice and lies would meet head-on. Every glance, every testimony, every page of evidence felt like the final push of a long campaign. Justice might not win. He knew that. But he was ready to face it, ready to stand tall for Grace until the very end. The courtroom was so still the tick of the wall clock felt like the heartbeat of everyone inside. Sam Dalton stood at the witness stand, gripping his file, eyes fixed on Grace. His daughter, small, trembling, but braver than anyone in the room, rose from her seat among neighbors, strangers, and the watchful eyes of the town. No one had expected that the sharpest moment, the clash of justice and deceit, would come from the voice of a child not yet 10. Grace drew a long breath, her shoulders quivering, tears streaking her cheeks, but her words rang clear. I have 2 dads, but only one I dream of every night." The sentence struck like a round fired into silence. Every gaze swung toward her. The judge narrowed his eyes, forcing his face still to hide the tremor of emotion. Mark Reynolds stiffened, his lips twitching, fear breaking through his mask. Anna staggered back a step, face pale, hand trembling against her mouth. Sam felt his chest crack open, his heart pounding so hard it seemed it would burst from his ribs. Grace's words were more than a child's innocence. They were a verdict. They were a wound torn open in Mark's control. Sam breathed deep, and in that breath he caught his daughter's scent, the cotton of her dress, the faint trace of morning milk. All the humiliation, all the lonely nights, turned into power in that instant. Her truth was the proof he had bled for. Mark sat frozen, knuckles pressed white against the table, eyes lit with something Sam had never seen in him before. Fear. The tricks, the threats, the forged papers, all of it crumbled under a single child's truth. Around them, the crowd of witnesses and townsfolk exchanged glances, silence thick with awe, shock, and a rising respect for the courage of one little girl. Anna's eyes welled with tears. She didn't speak, but her gaze told it all. Grace had never forgotten Sam. Time and distance had twisted the family apart, but in her daughter's heart, the image of her real father had held fast. Sam saw the tremor in Grace's small hands, felt her pulse in every word, every breath, but also her unshakable will. Sam couldn't hold back. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. "Grace, I'm here. I've always been here, no matter what." All eyes turned to father and daughter, the sunlight through the high windows falling across them, outlining Sam's worn face and the fierce tenderness in it. In that moment, the courtroom was not only a place of law but of family, of truth finally cutting through the lies. Sam's heart and Grace's seemed to beat in time, a slow, deep rhythm that filled the air with something unbreakable. Everyone felt it. Truth could not be hidden, bought, or bent. A child's voice had shattered the walls, torn through the deceit, and let the light in. A hot tear slid down Sam's cheek, not from anger, not from grief, from hope. His daughter had stood, uncoached, unafraid, and her words had burned away the lies. He knew this was the turning point. From here on, every scheme, every false claim would have to face the undeniable. Grace remembered him. The air shifted in the room. Even the judge, who had eyed Sam with doubt, could not look away from Grace. A breeze slipped through the old wood windows, carrying the faint scent of pine and dust, bearing witness to the moment. A child had spoken, a father was reclaimed, and truth was winning. Sam's heartbeat slowed, not with surrender but with triumph. Hope and family pulsed in it now. He turned his gaze on Mark Reynolds' eyes full of pain, fury, and resolve. Grace remembered, and from this moment on, nothing would ever erase that. The echo of Grace's words still lingered in the courtroom, like a bell that could not be unrung. Sam Dalton stood frozen at the stand, his hands trembling after months of silence and strain, his eyes still locked on his daughter. But now the light shifted to Anna, the woman who had once been his wife, the mother of his child. Her face had gone pale, her lips quivering. Every eye in the room turned toward her, waiting for what she might say, the truth Sam had prayed for but never dared to count on. Anna drew a shaky breath, her shoulders rising and falling, her fingers clutching the edge of the table. Each step she took toward the witness stand landed heavy, dragging time itself. Tears blurred her sight, shame pulling at her features, fear tightening her jaw. The room was silent, except for the crackle of paper as she picked up the file in front of her. Her voice cracked, fragile yet clear enough for all to hear. I was forced. Mark made me sign those papers. I only wanted stability for Grace, for myself, for our future." The words dropped like heavy rain on the courtroom. Sam's chest clenched, pain and relief tangled together. For months he had carried the weight of betrayal, Mark's grip, the town's whispers, his daughter caught between two worlds. Now Anna, the woman he had once trusted with everything, admitted the truth. Not only that she had signed under pressure, but why? Fear, desperation, the need to keep her daughter safe. A tear slid down Anna's cheek, followed by another until her handkerchief was damp. Her voice broke into sobs. "I was wrong. I didn't want Sam to suffer. I was just so afraid we'd lose everything if I didn't go along." Each word was like glass breaking in Sam's mind, cutting him open with memories of pain, yet laying bare the proof of Mark's control. Across the aisle, Mark Reynolds sat stiff, drained of color. His fortress cracked. He knew Anna's confession was the fracture that could topple everything, the money, the custody, the silence he had forced on Sam. For once, he had no words. But Sam no longer looked at him. He looked at Anna, his eyes a mixture of sorrow and steady resolve. He saw not just betrayal, but another victim trapped by fear, by money, by a man who had held them both in his grip. Grace stood nearby, her small hand clutching her dress, eyes wide on her mother. She felt her mother's collapse, the fracture between love and fear. Slowly, timidly, she stepped closer to Sam, her tear-bright eyes carrying a kind of comfort. Her mother had spoken the truth, and her father was still here. Sam drew a breath, the tightness in his chest loosening at last. He didn't scold, he didn't lash out. He met Anna's trembling eyes with a heavy, quiet look that held both forgiveness and understanding. He knew she had been broken down by Mark, by circumstance, by the terror of losing everything. Her hands shook, her heart raced, but she had spoken the truth. The room held its breath. The judge leaned forward, lips pressed, face impassive, but everyone knew the weight of what had just been said. Anna dropped the file back on the table, her shoulders collapsing, her head bowed. Her voice shook but gained strength. "I want to make this right. I want Grace to be with Sam." Hope rose in Sam's chest like a tide. There were battles still ahead, Mark's punishment, the legal knots, the town's judgment, but in that moment, the door had been pushed open. Anna's collapse wasn't an end, but the first step back toward truth, toward justice, toward family. Sam stepped forward, laying a steady hand on Anna's shoulder, a gesture stronger than words. Grace moved in, wrapping her small arms around her mother. And in that fragile triangle, father, mother, daughter Sam saw something reknit, fragile but real. The breaking of Anna was no longer a final fracture. It was a beginning, a chance for love and truth to lead them out of the ruins. The air in the courtroom was so thick it could have been cut with a blade. Every heartbeat seemed to match the pounding of the judge's gavel, but even that sound couldn't drown the tension hanging in the room. Sam Dalton stood steady, his eyes locked on Mark Reynolds, the man he had trailed, suspected, and built a case against in silence for months. Light slanted through the high window, catching the hard lines on Mark's face, the redness in his eyes, the cracks in the mask he had worn so long. Anna's confession had struck deeper than anyone imagined. Sam's body was wound tight as a wire, but his breathing was even, his gaze never wavering. Across the aisle, Mark's composure shattered. Rage boiled up, spilling into his trembling hands and tightening jaw. He tried to speak, his voice breaking into a roar, and then suddenly he lunged. With a fist drawn back, he rushed at Sam, screaming, "You'll never take anything from me, never!" Chows exploded. Witnesses gasped. Chairs scraped and toppled. Papers flew. Officers near the wall surged forward but hadn't yet reached him. Sam sidestepped, body alert, trained reflexes guiding him as he shielded the space near Grace and Anna. His stance was firm, defensive, not to fight, but to endure. And in that wild flash, everyone saw Mark for what he was. Not the polished man he had pretended to be, but a violent, desperate figure stripped bare. The shouting filled the chamber, blending with the sound of boots and the groan of wood under bodies colliding. An officer grabbed Mark's arm. He thrashed like a cornered animal, teeth bared, breath ragged. Sam stood still, cold-eyed, watching the unraveling. Every detail seared itself into memory. Mark's cracking voice, his fist slamming down on the table, evidence scattering across the floor. The man once admired in whispers now revealed himself in full, angry, selfish, brutal. Two more officers piled on. Metal cuffs clicked. Mark writhed, growling, cursing, but the fight drained from him. The room rang with his hoarse yells, the sound of a man who knew his walls had collapsed. Around him, Sam's evidence, financial records, transfers, testimony, recordings, seemed to glow brighter. The pieces were no longer just paper. They were mirrors, reflecting the truth of a man who had manipulated, threatened, and tried to erase a father for the sake of money and control. Anna clutched Grace to her chest, her tears still fresh, but mixed with something lighter relief. Grace pressed close to her mother, yet her tear-bright eyes found Sam, steady and unblinking. The child knew, without words, that her father had always been there, protecting, watching, loving. Sam drew a breath, his pulse thundering, but his mind calm. For the first time, he felt the burden shift. The tide was turning. The judge's gavel slammed again, not as routine this time, but as declaration. The law would proceed. The outburst had sealed its course. Officers dragged Mark back, his voice raw with curses, but the sound was empty now. He was finished. The evidence was undeniable. No polished speech, no forged document could bury what had just been revealed before the eyes of the town. Sam watched him go, his chest tight with a private kind of triumph. Months of gathering proof, of swallowing his rage, of walking through suspicion and whispers. Now it had borne fruit. Mark's mask had cracked in the one place he had tried to control most. Under oath, under law, in front of Grace. The man was undone. The room settled, a tide of whispers and sighs washing over wood benches and pale faces. And through it, eyes turned toward Sam, not the broken veteran the town had doubted, but the father who had stood tall through fire and deceit, and who had let truth, not anger, carry the day. Mark was gone, escorted in chains. The noise ebbed, and in the hush that followed, Sam knew the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, the path forward was clear. Grace, Anna, and truth itself were no longer in shadow. The enemy had been dragged into the light, and there was no hiding place left. The air inside the courtroom felt different now, stripped of the tension that had hung heavy for weeks. Afternoon light filtered through the windows, scattering across the polished glass and catching on the dust in the air, as if the day itself wanted to mark the change that was coming. Sam Dalton stood tall, shoulders squared, his hand gripping the thick folder of evidence he had carried like a weapon through this long fight. His heart beat fast, but there was no rage left in it, only a calm strength, the kind of calm that comes when a man has waited his whole life for this moment. Every pair of eyes, officers, lawyers, the judge, even neighbors sitting in the gallery, was fixed on him as silence pressed down on the room. When the judge began to speak, Sam felt each word land in his chest like a hammer. The court hereby grants full custody of Grace Dalton to her father, Mr. Sam Dalton. Mark Reynolds is ordered to surrender all rights and responsibilities immediately. The gavel struck hard against the bench, its echo not just a formality but the sound of something breaking, the sound of months of fear and oppression ending. The gallery exhaled all at once, some with tears, some with tight-lipped relief. Sam didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on Grace. She was standing there in her little flowered dress, eyes shining with tears, her small hands clenched at her side. Then she ran, no hesitation, no fear left, and threw her arms around him. "Dad," she whispered through her sobs, the word trembling, but true. Sam bent low, wrapping her up, holding on as if he could never let go again. He felt her heartbeat pressed against his chest, quick but strong, a rhythm that matched his own. The smell of her hair, the warmth of her body, it all washed away the months of loneliness, of doubt, of standing outside the walls of his own home. For the first time since he returned, he could breathe. Anna stood off to the side, eyes glassy with tears. She had confessed, at last, to the pressure, the manipulation, the mistakes she had made under Mark's shadow. She looked at them now, father and daughter, and exhaled, her hand trembling as she reached out and laid it gently on Grace's shoulder. Sam met her gaze. He no longer carried anger in it. What he saw was another soul, who had been cornered, broken, and afraid. There were no words between them, but the look they shared held enough understanding, forgiveness, and the quiet agreement that they would not let fear rule them again. Sam gathered up the papers and recordings he had fought so long to collect. They were no longer just scraps of evidence, they were monuments to patience, to truth, to the endurance that had carried him this far. He tucked them away, knowing he would not need them again the way he once had. Now his eyes stayed on Grace, who still held close but looked up at him with a quiet trust. Outside the courthouse, the last sun of the day spilled golden across the town's old brick buildings, dancing on the windows like a promise. Sam stepped out with Grace in his arms, each footfall echoing on the worn wooden floorboards behind them, like the heartbeat of a life returned. The road ahead would still be hard. There were wounds to heal, explanations to give, and trust to rebuild. But he walked forward with new resolve, to protect her, to mend the broken pieces, and to rebuild the family he thought was lost forever. The town around them went on with its noise cars rumbling, voices rising and falling, but to Sam and Grace, the world had gone quiet. They moved together in their own small orbit, father and daughter, hand in hand. Every breath, every step, was a vow. He would not waste another moment. Happiness, fragile but real, pulsed between them. It was not the end of struggle, but the beginning of something stronger. Love born from survival, hope built from ruin. And so Sam Dalton walked away from the courthouse with his daughter beside him, truly a family for the first time. The future would bring storms, but he no longer feared them. He had her, she had him. And together, they had a reason to keep walking toward the light. This story reminds us that justice and love do not always come quickly. They take patience, courage, and the will to hold on to what matters most. Family ties can stretch thin, but they do not break not if we fight for them. Sometimes anger must be set aside for wisdom, and the quiet work of gathering truth outlasts the loudness of deceit. And in the darkest days, even the smallest hope can be enough to lead us back home. Are you watching this story in the morning or at night? Tell me in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories of soldiers coming home, don't forget to subscribe to Soldiers Coming Home and walk this road with us.